should be taking place. It's fascinating to see that one of the big gaps that seems to exist is who finances civil dialogue. And that was one of the points that I wanted to make in the broader answering of the question. But before I get to that, another issue that I noticed hasn't maybe fully been discussed or has not been separated from the issue of EU accession is what's really the motivation for a government to engage in civil dialogue. It's not to achieve European Union accession, I hope that it's so that they are being responsible civil servants and responding to the needs of their citizens. There is a reality in most of the countries of the Balkans that the parliamentary system is one that is not of a direct election. There are some examples of open lists. There are very few instances of direct election unless it comes down to the president of the country or mayors of municipalities. And so the accountability of elected officials is slightly different than what it could be in a direct election type system. This puts civil society in a place where they might need to push harder, and yet the consequences for not engaging in civil dialogue are a little bit lower for the elected officials. The EU accession process and other processes that go along with it, most recently the roadmap for visa liberalization, seems to have put a fire, the conditionality of those processes seems to put a bit of a fire under some of the governments to achieve the standard, achieve the minimum that is required to get that document, that strategy done. But in reality, the quality of the consultation that may have taken place to do that strategy might have been less than what it could have been. And certainly in the countries that I am responsible for, it seems to be the case, because we're constantly getting applications for projects that are related to financing the civil dialogue that the government, in my mind, really should be responsible for financing. There's another issue, though. When civil dialogue has taken place, there are some common complaints that take place, and those complaints come from the side of civil society. And those complaints, some seem to be justified, and others seem to call into question as well what the true commitment of the civil society organizations are. Some of these complaints are, yes, we were invited to give our input. We were invited to a roundtable. The strategy that we were invited to give input at was not even distributed before the roundtable, but it was given at a PowerPoint presentation. We had 45 minutes as 50 of us gathered in the room to give a response, and that was public consultation, that was civil dialogue, and that's all that we had. Or if it was even a better process than that, the 75-page document was sent to us a week in advance, and we didn't have time to respond. You had made the comment earlier about the 60% of the laws that were passed under urgent procedure in Serbia. The countries, many of the countries that are currently in process of gearing up for meeting all of the requirements, they're passing 80, 100, 120 laws a year. If there was a requirement in these countries to have a civil dialogue process of 30 days and all of these procedures, I doubt that those laws would be able to pass, and the reality of EU accession might be further off than what we could. So it's another reality that we have to look at, is how do you balance the not being informed, not being able to participate and provide good dialogue with the issue that if real consultations and lawmaking process were to take place, it would extend it out further and further and further, and there's got to be some proper balance there. Never mind, at the drafts stage, prior to a draft law coming in or a draft strategy coming in, the proper setting up of working groups and doing focus groups of different interests. That almost seems a dream in some of the contexts of where reality is operating. I honestly don't see, again, in the countries that I'm referring to, Albania, Kosovo, and Macedonia, I don't see too much of a change moving forward. Not because the countries don't have a proper motivation, but perhaps because they know that they can get by with just doing the minimum. Because they got a good scorecard on the visa liberalization roadmap, and they've got a visa-free regime in some contexts, even though the reality of the documents that they put in place really didn't follow that. And the process of monitoring and the progress reports, it's important. I think there was a discussion before about civil society giving good input to the progress reports and participating in that process of making that. But if a real civil dialogue were to take place, and if all of the external actors, the European Union, other governments, foundations like the one I represent, were to play a role in supporting civil society and government to develop a true partnership, then that perfect reality would take into account what is the financing mechanism going to be, and what are the expectations of civil society. Will they participate in the process of consultation if they have to self-finance their participation, if they have to pay for their own fuel to come to the capital city for that event, or if they'll put themselves up in a hotel out of their own resources or out of the resources of their organization. Because a lot of times what happens in the process where we fund activities, the more richly budgeted projects seem to elicit much greater participation, and the less budgeted processes that are funded through ETD seem to suffer from participation. And so there's this proportional, the amount of money you spend, the more CSOs that you get to participate. And I think that goes to a certain framework or a certain thinking. And I'm not really trying to be critical of civil society organizations broadly, but it goes to a certain thinking that exists among some members of civil society that in order to participate, somebody's going to fund it. And I think that real civil dialogue happens out of a framework of the question of human rights was brought up earlier. And I think that a motivation for me as a citizen, or me as somebody who is active in my society, comes from wanting to protect other citizens and wanting to make sure that the government is looking at it from a human rights point of view and from the point of view of good governance. And my motivation should be to do that at all costs. And I don't think that always happens in the civil dialogue framework. So that was just another comment I wanted to make. There is a reality that regional cooperation, this will be my last point, does seem to be working as it relates to pushing national governments forward. There are some areas where this probably has happened better than others. The area of anti-trafficking, European Union support and other support to developing national referral mechanisms in anti-trafficking has created a model that, again, maybe it looks better on paper than in reality, but it's created a model of civil society active participation in these structures. Those groups are now coming together regionally because it's a regional issue. It's crossing borders, it's trafficking through places, other issues like migration, illegal migration and labor migration, organized crime. Security and defense is an area where the civil society organizations, maybe as service providers, maybe as trainers, maybe as policy makers, have played a role